Tommy is the brains behind 80s Wrestling on social media, 80s Wrestling Con. We met through 80s Wrestling Con, doing a little promotion, and I went to the first event. And I just thought it was interesting because not only did I learn, this wasn't your first venture. Like the longer we've known each other and the more people I meet that know you, you've really, you have a I think it's like 20-year history, or like you're a promoter. You've done more than the 80s stuff. You promoted your own shows in New Jersey. So I just kind of wanted to find out more about that. And like you alluded to, just how the pandemic has affected, the local level promoter. Like I've tried to make it varied. So I've talked to people on TV, and you do primarily in the New Jersey area. You've run your first 2 events and planned for the third in New Jersey and Freehold. And now you've moved to the virtual arena, so to speak. So can you just talk about, planning the 80s Wrestling Con in the first event and why you decided to get back into that? Because I know you took a few years off.
Yeah, man. Well, I stopped promoting. I was promoting since I was 16 years old, back in the end of 93, early 94, believe it or not. And I promoted conventions and shows for years. And back in 2010, I stopped doing my independent shows. I was just about to get married and just branched off to something else. But I still followed wrestling, religiously, and still watched it all the time, still read about it all the time. So I still wanted to feel like I was some way, somehow still involved with it. So just for fun, I started a 80s Wrestling social media account on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, just posting older pictures of when I was a kid watching wrestling, just for fun, really, man, just as a hobby. And, started posting pictures, and it blew up and it snowballed. And I started getting, thousands of followers, now to the point where I have over 500,000 followers between all the accounts that I do social media on, which was mind boggling. So as I was doing that, and I kept seeing the following grow bigger and bigger, I said to myself, well, I'd be a fool if I didn't capitalize on this following I had and did something. So I thought of the idea of doing a 80s wrestling convention. And that was April of last year, 2019. It was just supposed to be a one-time convention. And it went really, really good, to the point where I said, well, I'd be stupid if I didn't do another one. And that was back in last October. And I did a second 80s Wrestling Con, and that did really good. So I said, I guess I might as well do another one. So that was supposed to be scheduled for this past April. And then obviously everyone's world came crashing down in the beginning of March when, the pandemic began. And right away, I canceled it right away. Not canceled, I postponed it right away. In the beginning of March when it first happened. And I postponed it till the end of September, thinking that would be enough time to do it. But who would have known in the beginning of March that at the end of September, things would even get worse than it was in March. So obviously that one didn't happen. So, I mean, right now, I'm not going to plan a new date without seeing how the next several months, pan out first. It would be foolish to say, okay, well, the next 80s Wrestling Con is going to be live in April or live in May or June. Who knows what's going to happen over the next few months. So we'll see what happens. I'm definitely going to do it 100%. But in the meantime, I was saying to myself, well, if I want to capitalize on whatever, momentum I was getting and gathering through the 80s Wrestling Con, I got to do something. If I can't do live events, what can I do? And little by little, I saw little, snippets here and there of people starting to do virtual signings and not just with wrestling, with book signings and stuff. And I saw that, and I'm like, man, that's it. I knew right away as soon as I saw that I wanted to do it. One, because it was a way to still be connected and involved, and two, is because I have such a huge social media following that I knew it'd be successful. So I tested it back in September with Tito Santana. He's local. He lives a half hour from me. So I just tested to see how it would do, and it did really well. And once I saw that, I knew I was onto something. I knew I had to capitalize on it. So for October, I did Sergeant Slaughter. For November, I did Demolition. And after those two went really good, I'm like, well, I see I have something here, and I have to capitalize on it. So now I'm doing two a month, starting in December. Just last week, I did the Dream Team Valentine and Beefcake, and then coming up on December 28th, I have Coco Beware. And then going forward in 2021, I'm going to be doing them every 2 weeks. And for me, man, it's I actually enjoy it. I actually enjoy these more than the actual conventions. I know the cons are much more bigger and huger, but for me, it's a lot less stressful because when you're doing a convention, you're bringing in 15 to 20 guys, and that's 15 to 20 airfares, that's 15 to 20 hotels, that's 15 to 20 people to pick these guys up at the airport and bring them back to the hotel, then from the hotel to the venue, then from the venue back to the hotel, then the hotel back to the airport. And there's just so many moving pieces when you have that many guys. So when there's one guy, it's so much more laid back and relaxed. It's just, I rent a hotel room, I fly the talent in, I film it there, and it's just so much more laid back for me. And for me, it's much more rewarding because now I'm not just catering to fans that live in New Jersey. I have fans from all over the world that are taking part in these virtual signings. The last one, I had fans from 46 states and 10 countries take part in the virtual signing. And to me, man, it boggles my mind. I feel like I have to pinch myself, just having that reach with so many different states and countries throughout the world. And for me, man, it's been nothing but positive.
You just touched on something I want to kind of get into a little bit. I mean, obviously, it's putting on a con is a very could be and usually is a stressful thing for the promoter, and you just named all the stuff that that's just travel. That's not the stuff that could go wrong. And like how are you weighing your options despite not knowing the date of the next con? Like, are you leaning more towards just keeping virtual signings being your only thing, or do you still want to do the con just because of the in-person experience? Like, are you thinking that far ahead right now?
Yeah, well, I'll definitely still do the live cons because there's nothing like for fans meeting wrestlers live and in person and getting their picture with them and interacting with them. But I will never, ever, ever go away from doing the virtual signings now. I fell in love with them. So even when things get back to normal, hopefully one day, and everything's running smoothly again, I'll still do the virtual signings just because I now have a worldwide reach, which I wish I would have thought of this years ago. Having a wrestler, appearing live on their computer screen or their telephone or their tablet, and watching their picture or item get signed. We hold it up and show them the item. Then the wrestler gives them a shout out, and then after the signing's over, we ship the item back to the customer. And I wish I would have thought about this years ago because there's so many. This area because you live up this way. This area is so oversaturated with signings and shows and conventions. It seems like everyone and their mother's running it, and for me, it's so intriguing to be able to have someone from Nebraska or have someone from Japan or have someone from the United Kingdom take part of these events too. So for me, man, it's and because of the blessing I have of having this big social media following, to me, it's a no-brainer to continue doing these virtual signings long past the coronavirus being gone or under control.
Yeah, and I'll go over a few of them. You named some of them, but Coco Beware, Million Dollar Man, IRS, Ron Simmons, like no shortage of stars. So I mean, how would you, I guess, describe building a rapport with these guys? Because I know from personal experience, but some of the people listening to this might not know, like, you've worked with a few of them before. You mentioned Tito Santana. Like, I know you've worked with him quite a bit, but how do you go about building a rapport with them where it seems like it's more than just promoter wrestler here, here's an event I'm going to pay you for. Like, it seems like you have a good relationship with these guys that lasts more than just one event.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I guess it's I've been around for so long. Like I said, I've been around. I've been doing this for 27 years since I was 16 years old. So, when you do things the right way, and people, you work with talent, and they'll tell the talent, hey, this guy's a good guy, or it just snowballs from there, man. I've been blessed and fortunate to be able to do that. Like just for example, I had Demolition last month, and now I'm doing some stuff with them on the side as well. Um, they're going to be doing demograms with us. It's kind of like a cameo where the fans can, ask Demolition to wish them a happy birthday or anniversary or anything. And I'm doing that with them, and I'm working on some other projects with them right now as we speak. So yeah, man, it's I'm blessed to be able to form relationships with talents, and I look at it long past a one time signing. With the social media platform that I have, there's tons of opportunities for me to do different projects with the '80s guys, and I'm looking forward to making more relationships and doing some more stuff. I have a lot of ideas that I want to incorporate into another project. I'm currently a really big project I'm currently working on. So yeah, man, I appreciate you you realizing that and pointing that out, and I try my best to stand out and just do things a little bit differently than the average promoter.
Some of the other things I know you have in the works, you expanded outside of the 80s, and one of the signings in April is Extreme Wrestlers. And then not too many details on it now, but you're doing some 90s and early 2000s era stuff. Knowing that you really built your brand on the golden era in the 80s, what was the motivation for that, expanding into different decades?
Well, you figure, if I keep doing these twice a month, eventually I'm going to run out of guys. And there's only so many, unfortunately, only so many '80s guys still around. And if I want to continue to do the virtual signings, which I definitely want to do because I enjoy doing them, and I just love having that reach, that global reach, eventually I'm going to run out of guys. So what I did was I actually registered the domain name ProWrestlingVirtualSignings.com, and I'm going to eventually, you know, do 80s, 90s, and 2000 guys. A lot of fans have reached out to me before that and said, how my virtual presentations are so much different and better than everyone else's, and they would have loved to see me do more current guys. So I got several of those messages, and finally I took it into consideration, and I'm going to do that. So going forward in 2021, I will branch off to 90s and 2000 signings, but under the umbrella ProWrestlingVirtualSignings.com. 80s Wrestling Con's not going anywhere, man. I created that brand. I put a lot of hard work and time into that brand, and the 80s are always going to be the most popular era for anything. If you see on social media, 80s TV shows, 80s cartoons, everything, 80s is just so popular. It's never going to go away, even long after these guys are gone. That decade and that time frame and those guys will last forever. So I'm going to still do that. There's no way I'm getting away from doing that. I'm just adding on to stuff I'm going to do because back earlier this year, I got furloughed from my job. I was actually the marketing director for California Pizza Kitchen. Love the job, love the company. And just, with the pandemic, man, so many companies and businesses had such a hard time and struggled so bad that they had to lay off a lot of their workforce. And unfortunately, I was one of them in August. So that came. I was, once when I got furloughed in March, the working plan was definitely for me to go back. So, I waited a lot of time, and August came, and I got let go. So I'm thinking to myself, well, at least I have, at least I have the experience of being a marketing director for a national company I can put on my resume. I should have no problem finding a job whatsoever. So I started sending out my stuff and sending my stuff out everywhere, man. I wasn't getting no calls back. I was literally just sitting around waiting. I sent out probably 100 resumes, some to many companies I was overqualified for, just to try and get a job at that point. And it wasn't happening. And then I decided to put my fate in my own hands, man. And I'm going to do wrestling full time. So that's why, the main reason why I'm expanding my 80s to 90s, 2000s. Just I'm going to make wrestling my full time job. So I got to have other options, other choices to do other than just 80s.
Yeah, and that's another thing I wanted to touch on. That's an observation I made was, you weren't doing this as your full-time career. Like, you had found success in the restaurant business and marketing. Like, you were doing this because you loved wrestling and you could see that, but then somebody else, or actually nobody else, but the current climate made it where you had to kind of figure out what was next. And it's really unfortunate that you were a victim of that, but now you're doing it where you started off with the signings, and you're doing it in a safe way to still provide not only wrestling content, but a way for these guys to make money, and a way for fans to still be involved, because you have to look at it at several different ways. Like, regardless of how you feel about the TV companies still running events, and like, these guys that do the conventions, like, not just the promoters, the actual wrestlers, like, they probably, some of them depend on this income now that they're not working full time, they're getting up there in age. Like, so not only are you providing for yourself, for the fans, but you're providing for the wrestlers too. So I think that's commendable. And it's been really cool to see not only how you've handled it, but moving forward. I know you want to expand with the the different decades, but you also were just briefly talking about opening a brick and mortar store. So you're doing things that aren't traditional, but it still shows your love of wrestling. And I think that's kind of one of the big reasons I wanted to talk to you, is because you're going against the grain, and you've found success with pretty much anything you've done so far. And just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the future, about the store, being a full-time promoter now that that avenue was open to you.
Yeah, man. I first of all, I really, really appreciate all the kind words you just said, man. It really means a lot to me. And also want to say I appreciate, over the last 2 years, everything I've done. You guys, WrestleZone's been behind me 110%. And I just want to let you know that it really means a lot to me that, there's a lot of promoters out there in the United States, but, you always, always push my stuff big time. And I really appreciate that. And for me, man, this is kind of a blessing, me getting let go from my job. I know it's crazy that sounds. It was scary when it happened at first, but it forced me to decide what I wanted to do. And I'll be honest, man, ever since I was a kid growing up and I got into the business and was promoting stuff, wrestling was never my full-time job. It's just something I did on the side. I'm a marketing guy, man. I love marketing. So I can market pizza, because what I was doing at California Pizza Kitchen. I can market wrestling. You hand me something, I can market it, man. I love promoting. I love marketing, but there's nothing more I love to do than promote and market wrestling, because that's my true love since I was a little kid, man. So for me, it forced me to finally pull the trigger on being a part of the wrestling business full time. So I'm excited, man. This is the first time ever I'm about to be full time in the wrestling business. It's for me, it's a long time coming. It's something I've always wanted to do. Something I'm excited to do because I've done the stuff that I've done, and I appreciate you saying that I've always been successful doing the stuff that I do. That really means a lot to me. So for me, it excites me to be able. So just say I work on that stuff 3 hours a day or 4 hours a day. For me, it excites me to be able to work on this full time every day. So I'm excited and curious to see what I can do, having all my free time now to just concentrate on wrestling and do wrestling stuff. I can't wait for to do that. And the store, and I'm going to be opening up a store in North Jersey over the next month or two. I'm going to be announcing the date and location within the next week or two. So between that and my signings and other cool stuff I'm working on to have on the website of the store, which it's going to be an online store as well. The store is going to be called The Wrestling Collector. The website's already up. It's thewrestlingcollector.com. Right now, it's coming soon, but it's going to be an online store along with the actual storefront that I'm having in New Jersey. And yeah, man, for me, first of all, I'm blessed that my whole family has been safe and sound throughout this whole pandemic. That's number one. That's the most thing I'm most grateful for. But I have to say that I'm grateful to have things happen the way they happen, because if I never got let go from my job, I never would have been doing these weekly virtual signings, because I wouldn't have had the time to do it. I mean, I'm sorry, biweekly signings. I wouldn't have time to do it. So for me, it forced my hand to get more involved and do more stuff, and I'm just really excited to see what the future holds with me being able to do wrestling full time, because it's something I always wanted to do.
Yeah, and I can say this. I've had a few people reach out and they're like, "Oh, you're promoting those virtual signings for the '80s guys. Like, how do I get in on that?" And I was like, "All right, that's a sign that it's working, because people are noticing. Like, sometimes I don't, you don't measure things in like traffic and data, but just you can see like word of mouth and social media attention.
Sure.
And I think that's a testament to how it's catching on. And I mean, you started doing them in September and now it's blowing up, and it's just really cool to see, like, you had an idea that probably rubbed off on a few, because as they say in the wrestling business, there's no such thing as an original idea. But I think you had one here, and I think like, nostalgia is a crazy thing. Like, I know even now people try to figure out like why it's so popular, but I think, speaking like specifically to wrestling, like, that's what we grew up on. So yeah, there's nostalgia, but like,
Sure.
that was larger than life. Like, now, like, I enjoy it, I love it, but it's not the same. Like, you had these characters, you had the promos, you had like special effects, like, like the just the whole thing, just it felt bigger then. And I don't know if our kids are gonna say that in 30 years about what's going on today. Like, but I just think there's something, like, how do you feel about it? Because I know you grew up in, and you kind of explained like your passion of why you love wrestling, but I mean, if it's not too big picture, like, why the '80s?
Same reason you just said, man. It was larger than life then. Everyone was a superstar back then. Everyone was so different, whether it was Hulk Hogan or King Kong Bundy or Junkyard Dog or whoever it was, man. They were just all larger than life characters. Where today, first of all, I'm not saying anything bad about today's wrestling, because the talent today blows away the talent from the '80s as far as in-ring ability goes. But if I was standing in line at Walmart, and I'm not a wrestling fan, I'm standing in line at Walmart and Seth Rollins is standing in front of me, or King Kong Bundy is standing in front of me, I'm going to point to King Kong Bundy and say, I don't know who that is, but that's somebody. it just so they were just so large in life characters back then. They looked like, they looked like big bad wrestlers. They looked like stars. Just everyone just stood out and was different. Just today everyone just kind of like a cookie cutter version of the next guy. It's just so different to me, man. And like I said, I'm not taking away anything from today's wrestling because the guys are super talented. But even everything was different back then, man. The storylines are different. Back then there were squash matches, which made the superstars even larger than life than they actually were. From all the different gimmicks and characters to the talk show segments like the Brother Love show and the barber shop, or having managers, or the cartoons. It just everything was so different back then, man. And there'll never be another time period like it. Just like fans that grew up in the mid to late '90s, there'll never be another time frame like the Monday Night Wars for those fans. I don't see that catching on to fans from this era. Like the '80s guys say, we know that was the golden era, and then the '90s fans say, well, that was the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. But unfortunately, fans today can't say that. You have AEW, you have NXT. All that stuff's great, but it just doesn't stand out, like, in my opinion, like the '80s and even '90s did.
Yeah, that's why I put it the way I did. Like, I wonder if like our kids in this generation, like, they're gonna look back and be like, oh man, there was that person that they attach to, because it's different, but they're also looking at it as from a kid's perspective. Like, maybe they will, and maybe we'll say like, oh no, you don't, like, you don't know how good we had it. You had, and again, like, we're not saying anything bad about, it's just there's something about that decade, and there's something about nostalgia that you can't explain, but it keeps bringing you back to it, and it captivates.
Absolutely, man.
So I know we've covered a lot, and I'll close on this. You've worked with a lot of people. You've built relationships with them. Who's your favorite wrestler as a kid, and if I'm not putting you on the spot too much, who's your favorite wrestler to work with now? Just maybe because you're a fan, you were or weren't a fan of them when you were growing up, and now you get to, see another side of them and maybe have a new appreciation for them.
Yeah. I'd say for me, growing up, it's tough to say one guy growing up who my favorites were, man. Obviously Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, Roddy Piper. It's tough to just name a couple. Just all those big stars from that golden era, man, captivated me. As far as talent I work with these days, there's a lot, man. I can honestly say everyone I've worked with has been super cool to me, and super respectful to me, which makes things a lot easier. I don't know. It's because obviously some of them I know already because I've worked with them in the past, or they just know my reputation or know of me. But everyone's been super great to work with. Everyone has been totally respectful to me. I'm going to probably say Tito Santana is my favorite guy to work with, only because I work with him more frequently than the other guys. He lives right here in New Jersey. So for me, it's super easy to work with him because there's no airfare involved. There's no hotel involved. He's a super nice guy, really down to earth and really easy to work with. But yeah, I like working with a lot of guys, man. I just had Demolition last month. I loved working with them. Sergeant Slaughter was great to work with. I can't say anything bad about any of them. As far as, I don't know if you asked, but if not, I'll answer anyway. As far as the current talent goes, probably my favorite guy and I don't watch that often, to be honest with you, man. I can't sit through a 3-hour Raw, unfortunately, or a 2-hour SmackDown. It doesn't grab my attention like the '80s or the '90s did. I'll watch the major pay-per-views like WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, Survivor Series. I'll watch those whole shows just to still, see what's going on. But as far as weekly stuff, I don't watch it. But my favorite guy to watch from today's wrestling in my opinion, he's by far the best worker in the entire business is Randy Orton.
I think a lot of people would agree with you. He's, especially coming off of this week with the Firefly Inferno match, but you've worked with his dad. Maybe you can work with him someday. And
I actually had an opportunity to meet Randy last year. I was sending him. He was following me on Twitter, so I found some old cool pics of his dad that I've never seen before, and I sent it to him and actually hit it off with him. And last time he was up here in Jersey, he left tickets for us to come to SmackDown, and we were front row and went backstage and met him afterwards. He's super, super cool. But yeah, I'm actually working with his dad on March 25th. Bob Orton will be one of our virtual signings.
Again, that's 80swrestlingcon.com. It has the schedule of all the updated signings. We're recording this in December, but next Monday, Coco Beware, $1 Million Man, IRS. You have a lot coming up from the virtual signing standpoint. The Wrestling Collector. We'll wait and see where you set up shop, and hopefully we'll have a lot more to talk about when you announce the next 80s Wrestling Con date. So Tommy, again, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate everything.